Hello. Welcome back. If this is released on the day I plan it, this video and episode will be released on Memorial Day 2024. A day when America honors its fallen soldiers. This story you're about to listen to is not about a fallen soldier, but is about a soldier coming home from war to find out the shattering news of his wife. The mother of his children is a traitor. The question is, how would you respond to that devastating news? That's the question that will be explored in this upcoming story you're about to listen to: patriotism, love, treason, and sacrifice. Now, unlike the other stories released on this channel, this will be the first one that'll have a pick your own conclusion. There's 4 of them, and I'll be back when you get to conclusion 1. And now, without further ado.
Chapter 1. The Homecoming. After what felt like an eternity, the soldier finally set foot on familiar soil. The air carried the scent of home, a comforting blend of freshly cut grass and the salty breeze from the nearby ocean. It had been years since he last breathed this air, years spent fighting in a brutal war that had taken him to the farthest reaches of the world. As he walked through the gates of the military base, his heart pounded with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Memories of his last homecoming flooded his mind. The tearful embraces, the laughter of his children, the warmth of his wife's kiss. Would this reunion be just as joyful, or would the horrors he had witnessed cast a shadow over their reunion? He pushed those thoughts aside, determined to savor this moment. His eyes scanned the crowd of families eagerly awaiting their loved ones, and there they were. His wife and 2 children, their faces beaming with joy. In that instant, nothing else mattered but the love that bound them together. With quickened steps, he closed the distance between them, his arms already outstretched. His wife was the first to reach him, throwing herself into his embrace with a force that nearly knocked him off his feet. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling the familiar scent that had kept him going through the darkest days of the war.
"You're home,"
she whispered, her voice thick with emotion.
"You're finally home."
He held her tighter, savoring the warmth of her body against his. For a moment, the world around them faded away, and it was just the 2 of them, reunited after what felt like a lifetime apart. Then came the sound of tiny footsteps, and his children were upon him, clinging to his legs with their little arms. He released his wife and knelt down, enveloping them in a fierce hug that threatened to crush their small frames.
"Daddy, you're squishing us."
His daughter giggled, her laughter like music to his ears.
"I missed you so much,"
he said, planting kisses on their foreheads.
"Every day, every hour, I thought of you."
As he pulled back, he took in the sight of their faces, committing every detail to memory. His son had grown taller, his features sharper, a hint of the man he would one day become. His daughter's eyes sparkled with the same mischievous glint he remembered, her smile lighting up the world around her. It was then that he noticed the strange tattoo on his wife's neck, partially obscured by her hair. A symbol he didn't recognize, but one that seemed vaguely familiar. A chill ran down his spine, but he quickly dismissed it. Not now, he thought. Not when he had finally been reunited with the people he loved most in this world. He rose to his feet, his wife's hand finding his, their fingers intertwining as if they had never been apart. Together, they walked towards the gates, his children skipping ahead, eager to show their father the world that had changed so much in his absence. For now, the war was a distant memory, and all that mattered was the love that bound this family together. But even as he basked in the warmth of their reunion, a nagging feeling tugged at the back of his mind, a premonition that this moment of joy was merely the calm before the storm. Chapter 2. The Revelation. In the days that followed his homecoming, the soldier found himself constantly drawn to the strange tattoo on his wife's neck. At first, he had dismissed it as a mere curiosity, a passing fancy that held no significance. But as the weeks went by, the symbol began to haunt him, niggling at the back of his mind like a persistent itch he couldn't scratch. It wasn't until he was leafing through an old military dossier that the pieces fell into place. There, emblazoned on the cover, was the same symbol. The unmistakable crest of the enemy faction they had been fighting against for years. A chill ran down his spine as he traced the intricate lines with his finger, the realization dawning upon him like a ton of bricks. He tried to rationalize it, to find some innocent explanation for why his wife would bear such a mark. Perhaps it was a youthful indiscretion, a rebellious act from her younger days. Or maybe it was a cruel prank, a twisted joke played by someone with a morbid sense of humor. But deep down, he knew the truth. A truth so horrifying that he could scarcely bring himself to confront it. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, the weight of his discovery hung heavy in the air. His children prattled on, oblivious to the turmoil brewing beneath their father's stoic exterior. His wife, ever the attentive hostess, kept the conversation flowing, her smile never faltering. But as the meal drew to a close and the children scampered off to play, the soldier found himself unable to remain silent any longer. He had to know, had to hear the words from her own lips, no matter how much they might shatter the illusion of happiness he had clung to since his return.
What is the meaning of that tattoo on your neck?
He asked, his voice low and steady, betraying none of the inner turmoil that threatened to consume him. His wife's movement stilled, her eyes widening ever so slightly before she regained her composure.
It's just a silly thing from my youth.
She replied, her tone light and dismissive.
You know how reckless we all were back then.
But the soldier wasn't satisfied. He had seen too much, endured too much, to be fooled by such a flimsy lie.
Don't play games with me,
he said, his jaw clenching.
I know what that symbol means. I've seen it before, on the battlefield, mocking me from the enemy's banners.
His wife's mask slipped then, and for a fleeting moment, he saw something akin to fear flash across her features. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a steely resolve that chilled him to the bone.
So, you've figured it out.
She said, her voice barely above a whisper.
I had hoped to spare you this pain, but I see now that there is no escaping the truth.
The soldier felt his heart pounding in his chest, each beat a hammer blow against his ribcage. He wanted to scream, to rage against the injustice of it all, but he found himself paralyzed, frozen in place by the weight of her confession.
I am a spy for the enemy.
His wife said, each word piercing his heart like a dagger.
I have been for years, long before we even met.
The soldier felt the world spinning around him, the walls closing in as the truth he had dreaded was laid bare before him. He wanted to lash out, to scream and rage against this cruel betrayal, but he found himself paralyzed, his voice caught in his throat.
How?
Was all he could muster, his voice a hoarse whisper. His wife's gaze grew distant, as if she were replaying memories long buried.
It started when I was just a girl.
She began.
My family was caught up in the conflict, and we lost everything. Our home, our livelihood, our very way of life. In the midst of that despair, the enemy faction took me in, raised me as one of their own.
She paused, her eyes glinting with a mixture of remorse and defiance.
They showed me a different side of the war, one that our leaders had kept hidden from us. They taught me that there are no clear lines between right and wrong, only shades of gray.
The soldier shook his head, his mind reeling from the revelations.
But how could you lie to me all these years? How could you betray your own country, your own people?
A sad smile tugged at the corners of his wife's lips.
You have to understand, my love, that to me, they were my people. They were the ones who gave me a purpose, a reason to fight when all seemed lost.
Don't touch me!
He growled, his jaw clenched so tightly that he feared his teeth might shatter. Her hand fell back, dejected.
I never meant to hurt you.
She said, her voice thick with emotion.
When I met you, it was like a light piercing through the darkness. For the first time in my life, I felt whole, like I had found a place where I truly belonged.
The soldier scoffed, his heart hardening with each passing moment.
So, what? You thought you could just abandon your allegiance, Leave your treachery behind as if it were nothing?
No.
She replied, her gaze unwavering.
I knew there would be consequences, but I was willing to face them. For you, for our children. I wanted to build a new life, one free from the shackles of the past.
The soldier rose from his chair, his body trembling with a potent mix of anger and heartbreak.
You lied to me.
He said, his voice barely audible.
You looked me in the eye, day after day, and fed me nothing but lies.
I never lied about loving you.
His wife pleaded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears.
Everything I feel for you, for our family, is real. More real than anything I've ever known.
But the soldier had heard enough. He turned on his heel, unable to bear the sight of her any longer. As he stormed out of the room, her voice followed him, desperate and pleading.
Please, don't go. We can get through this, I swear it.
But her words fell on deaf ears. The man she thought she knew was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shell consumed by the bitter taste of betrayal. As the door slammed behind him, he stumbled into the night, his world shattered into a million pieces. He had returned from the war a hero, but now he felt like a fool. A fool who had allowed himself to be blinded by love, only to have that love twisted into a cruel deception. His wife, the woman he had sworn to protect with his life, was the enemy he had been fighting against all along. As he wandered aimlessly through the streets, his mind whirled with 1,000 unanswered questions. How much had she known about his missions? Had she been feeding information to the enemy all this time? And what of their children? Were they mere pawns in her game, or innocents caught in the crossfire? The weight of it all threatened to crush him, and he found himself sinking to his knees, his body racked with anguished sobs. He had sacrificed so much for his country, endured horrors that would haunt him until his dying day, all in the name of loyalty and honor. And now, that very loyalty had been twisted into a cruel mockery, his honor stripped away by the one person he had trusted above all others. As the night closed in around him, he found himself adrift in a sea of doubt and despair, unsure of where to turn or who to trust. For the first time in his life, the soldier felt truly alone. Chapter 3. The Dilemma. In the days that followed his wife's shattering confession, the soldier found himself trapped in a waking nightmare, torn between the love he still harbored for his family and the duty that had been drilled into him from the moment he took his oath. Every waking moment was a battle against the conflicting emotions that threatened to tear him apart from the inside. Memories that had once brought him solace now taunted him, each cherished moment with his wife and children cast in a new, sinister light. Had it all been a lie? A carefully orchestrated deception designed to lull him into a false sense of security? Or had there been genuine love and affection buried beneath the layers of deceit? He would often find himself poring over old photographs, his fingers tracing the contours of his wife's smiling face, searching for any hint of the truth lurking behind her eyes. In those stolen moments, he could almost convince himself that what they had shared was real, that the woman he had fallen in love with was more than just a mask worn by a master spy. But then reality would come crashing back, and he would be consumed by a wave of anger and resentment so intense that it threatened to drown him. How could she have done this to him? To their children? Had their entire life together been nothing more than an elaborate charade, a means to an end for her twisted allegiance? Sleep eluded him, his nights haunted by visions of battlefields and bloodshed. In his dreams, he would find himself back on the front lines, fighting an enemy he could never truly defeat, an enemy that had wormed its way into the very heart of his home, his sanctuary. His children sensed the shift in their father, the darkness that had descended upon him like a shroud. They would watch him from a distance, their eyes brimming with confusion and fear, unsure of how to bridge the chasm that had opened between them. Even his wife kept her distance, respecting the invisible barrier that now stood between them. She would steal furtive glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking, her gaze equal parts longing and remorse. But she never pushed, never demanded answers or explanations, as if sensing that any attempt at reconciliation would only drive him further away. It was during one of his sleepless nights that the soldier found himself wandering into his children's room. They lay there, peaceful and innocent, their dreams untainted by the harsh realities that plagued their father's waking hours. As he watched them sleep, he was transported back to the day they were born, the overwhelming joy and love he had felt cradling their tiny bodies in his arms. In those moments, nothing else had mattered. Not the war, not the divisions that tore their world asunder. All that existed was the pure, unbreakable bond between a father and his children. It was then that he realized the true nature of the dilemma that confronted him. Could he truly turn his back on his family, the very people he had sworn to protect with his life? Or would he be forced to sacrifice his honor, his loyalty to his country, in order to preserve the love that had once been his guiding light? The weight of that decision threatened to crush him, and he found himself sinking to his knees beside his children's beds, his body racked with silent sobs. How had it all come to this? How had the life he had fought so hard to build been reduced to such a cruel, impossible choice? As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, the soldier rose to his feet, his jaw set in a grim line of determination. He could no longer remain paralyzed by indecision, caught in the endless cycle of doubt and despair. He would make his choice, come what may, and face the consequences head-on. For better or worse, he would confront the truth that had been laid bare before him, and in doing so, he would either reclaim the life he had once known or forever sever the ties that bound him to his family. As he turned to leave the room, his gaze fell upon his children one last time, their innocent faces a stark reminder of all that he stood to lose. With a heavy heart, he steeled himself for the battle ahead, knowing that no matter what path he chose, a part of him would be forever scarred by the revelations that had shaken him to his core.
Hey! Glad you're still here. So for those of you that prefer love of country over everything, including family, then conclusion 1 is for you.
Conclusion 1. Loyalty to country. As the weight of his decision settled upon him, the soldier felt a strange sense of clarity wash over him. For too long, he had been adrift, caught in the emotional maelstrom of his wife's betrayal. But now, with a renewed sense of purpose, he knew what he had to do. No matter how much it might shatter the remnants of the life he had once known. He was a soldier, first and foremost, bound by an unbreakable oath to protect his country and its people from all threats, foreign and domestic. And his wife, the woman he had once loved with every fiber of his being, was now an enemy combatant. A snake that had slithered its way into his home, poisoning the very foundations of his existence with her lies and deceit. The thought of turning her over to the authorities, of subjecting her to the full weight of military justice, twisted his insides into knots. But he knew, deep down, that it was the only path forward, the only way to excise the cancer that had taken root within his family. As he made his way to the base's detention center, his footsteps heavy with resignation, he couldn't help but steal one last glance at the home he was leaving behind. Memories flickered through his mind like snippets from a life that no longer belonged to him. Lazy Sunday mornings spent making pancakes with his children, quiet evenings curled up with his wife by the fire, the gentle lull of her voice as she read them to sleep. He blinked back the tears that threatened to spill forth, hardening his resolve. Those memories were tainted now, forever stained by the harsh reality of his wife's deception. He could no longer allow himself to be swayed by the ghost of the life he had once cherished. The process was clinical, efficient. A well-oiled machine designed to strip away the humanity from even the most tragic of situations. He sat across from a stern-faced officer, his voice flat and emotionless as he recounted the details of his wife's confession, laying bare the truth that had shattered his world. There were no outbursts, no pleading or bargaining. The soldier knew better than to appeal to the emotions of those tasked with upholding the letter of the law. He was a soldier, and he would face the consequences of his wife's actions with the same stoicism he had carried into battle time and time again. As the officers led her away, her wrists bound in cold steel, he caught one last glimpse of her face. Gone was the mask of defiance she had worn in the aftermath of her confession, replaced by a look of utter devastation. In that moment, he saw a flicker of the woman he had once loved, a fleeting glimpse of the person she might have been had fate not steered them down this tragic path. But it was too late for such sentiments. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back. The days that followed were a blur of legal proceedings and hearings, each one stripping away another layer of the life he had once known. His children, confused and frightened by their mother's sudden absence, clung to him like lifelines, their innocent questions piercing his heart with every utterance.
When is Mommy coming home? Did she have to go away because of me? I miss her so much, Daddy. Please, bring her back.
And each time, he would force himself to remain steadfast, to push down the guilt and anguish that threatened to consume him. He was a soldier, he reminded himself, and soldiers did not falter in the face of adversity. In the end, his wife's sentence was swift and unbending. 20 years in a military prison for espionage and treason against her country. As the judge's gavel fell, sealing her fate, the soldier felt the last remnants of the life he had known shatter around him. He was a hero, the officers told him, a man who had put duty and honor above all else. But as he gathered his children in his arms, their tear-stained faces a cruel reminder of the price he had paid, he couldn't help but wonder if the cost had been too high. As they made their way back to the empty house that no longer felt like home, the soldier couldn't shake the feeling that he had emerged from this ordeal not as a victor, but as a casualty of a war that had raged far too close to home.
If your line of thought is the exact opposite of conclusion 1, meaning although you were willing to sacrifice your life for your country, but sacrificing family for country is a bridge too far, then conclusion 2 is for you.
Conclusion 2. Family comes first. As the dust settled in the aftermath of his wife's confession, the soldier found himself torn between the dictates of duty and the love that bound him to his family. For years, he had lived and breathed the creed of loyalty to his country, sacrificing everything in the name of honor and service. But now, faced with the prospect of tearing his world asunder, he felt that unwavering conviction begin to waver. Could he truly condemn the woman he had once loved, the mother of his children, to a fate worse than death? Could he bear the weight of his children's anguished cries, their innocent minds unable to comprehend the harsh realities that had shattered their family? As he sat across from his wife, her eyes brimming with a potent mix of remorse and defiance, he was transported back to the day they had first met. He remembered the way his heart had skipped a beat, the world around them fading into insignificance as he found himself lost in the depths of her gaze. In that moment, he had known. Truly known, that she was the one, the missing piece that would make his life whole. And though the years had brought challenges and hardships, that love had remained his constant, his guiding light through even the darkest of times.
Please,
she whispered, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion.
don't do this. Not for me, but for them.
Her gaze flickered to the doorway, where their children stood watching, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. In that instant, the soldier saw not the hardened spy that had infiltrated his life, but the woman he had fallen in love with. The woman who had borne his children, who had filled their home with laughter and joy. And in that moment, he made his choice. They fled under the cover of night, abandoning the life they had once known for the uncertainty of the open road. The soldier burned his uniform, severing his ties to the military that had once been his entire world. From that moment on, they were ghosts, slipping through the shadows and constantly looking over their shoulders. It was a life of fear and hardship, of constantly moving from one safe house to the next, never allowing themselves to put down roots. But through it all, they remained together. A family bound not by blood or allegiance, but by the love that had sustained them through even the darkest of times. The soldier became a chameleon, adopting new identities and personas as easily as changing clothes. One day he was a traveling salesman, the next a small-town mechanic. His wife, too, shed her former life like a serpent shedding its skin, embracing the role of dutiful spouse and mother with a fervor that nearly convinced even him of its authenticity. And yet, beneath the ever-shifting facade, a part of him yearned for the life he had left behind. He would awaken in the dead of night, his body drenched in a cold sweat, the echoes of gunfire and screams still ringing in his ears. In those moments, he was transported back to the battlefield, his mind unable to escape the horrors that had once been his reality. But then his wife would stir beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness, and he would be anchored once more. This, his family, was his reality now, the only thing that mattered in a world that had shown him its true, ugly face. As the years bled into one another, their children grew and flourished, blissfully unaware of the sacrifices their parents had made to ensure their safety. The soldier watched them with a mixture of pride and sorrow, knowing that he had traded one life of service for another. This time, in the name of love rather than duty. And though the specter of his wife's past would rear its head from time to time, a constant reminder of the fragility of their existence, he never once wavered in his conviction. He had made his choice, and he would see it through to the bitter end, no matter the cost. For in the end, it was not the dictates of country or creed that truly mattered, but the unbreakable bonds of family. The one thing that had sustained him through even the darkest of times, the one thing worth sacrificing everything for. As they settled into yet another temporary home, the soldier pulled his wife close, breathing in the familiar scent that had become his anchor in the storm. And though the road ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty, he knew that as long as they faced it together, no obstacle would prove too great. For he was no longer a soldier bound by duty and honor, but a man who had chosen love above all else. And that, he knew, was a battle worth fighting until his dying breath.
Similar to Conclusion 2, where the soldier chooses family over country, Conclusion 3 takes that scenario to its logical conclusion.
Conclusion 3. The ultimate sacrifice. As the weight of his wife's confession bore down upon him, the soldier found himself adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions. Love and loyalty, duty and betrayal. These forces waged war within him, tearing at the very fabric of his being until he felt as though he might unravel completely. Part of him yearned to cling to the life he had once known, to the love that had sustained him through even the darkest of times. But the soldier in him, the man bound by an unbreakable oath, knew that there could be no absolution for his wife's actions. She had committed the ultimate sin, betraying not only her country but the very foundations of their marriage. And yet, as he looked into the eyes of his children, their innocent gazes reflecting the shattered remnants of the life they had once known, he couldn't help but wonder if there was another way. Could he truly condemn them to a life without their mother, consigning them to a fate worse than death in the name of duty and honor? It was this thought that propelled him forward, setting him on a path that would either redeem him in the eyes of his family or damn him as a traitor to everything he had once held dear. Under the cloak of night, he slipped away from the base, his movements fueled by a desperate sense of purpose. He knew the risks, knew that every step he took carried the weight of consequences that could very well cost him his life. But in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not duty, not honor, not even the specter of his wife's betrayal. All that mattered was keeping his family whole, preserving the love that had been his guiding light through even the darkest of times. He found them. His wife's handlers, in a seedy back alley, their faces concealed by the shadows that had become their allies in this brutal game of deception and espionage. As he confronted them, his heart thundered in his chest, each beat a reminder of the fragility of the life he was risking for the sake of his family.
I know what you're going to say.
He began, his voice barely above a whisper.
That I should turn her over, that I should uphold the oath I swore to protect this country at all costs.
The figures remained silent, their stillness more unnerving than any overt threat could ever be.
But you don't understand.
He pressed on, desperation creeping into his tone.
She's not just a spy, not just a traitor to be punished for her crimes. She's my wife, the mother of my children. And I will not let you take her from us.
A beat of silence, then a low chuckle that sent a chill down his spine.
And what, pray tell, do you propose to do about it, soldier?
The soldier swallowed hard, his palms slick with sweat.
I'm offering a trade.
He said, his voice steadier than he felt.
My life for theirs.
Another beat of silence, this one stretching on for an eternity. Then, a nod from the shadows, and the soldier felt his heart plummet.
Very well.
Came the reply, cold and devoid of emotion.
Your life for theirs. But know this. If you ever try to contact them again, if you breathe so much as a word of this to anyone, the deal is off. Do you understand?
The soldier nodded, his throat too constricted to speak. He understood all too well. From that moment on, his life became a living hell. He was forced to watch from afar as his wife and children went about their lives, blissfully unaware of the sacrifice he had made to ensure their safety. Every waking moment was a torment, a constant reminder of the love he had forsaken in the name of duty and honor. But through it all, he remained resolute, clinging to the fleeting glimpses of his family that sustained him through even the darkest of times. He watched as his children grew, their smiles and laughter a balm to his tortured soul. And though he could never truly be a part of their lives again, he drew strength from the knowledge that they were alive, that they were safe from the harsh realities that had torn their family asunder. And his wife, his beautiful, strong wife, she carried on, her head held high, never knowing the truth of the bargain her husband had struck. To her, he was simply a ghost, a specter from a life that had slipped through her fingers like grains of sand. But the soldier knew better. He was no ghost, but a living, breathing man who had willingly sacrificed everything for the sake of those he loved most in this world. As the years bled into one another, the soldier found himself growing weary, his body and spirit worn down by the constant strain of living a life in the shadows. But still, he persevered, his love for his family a flame that burned brighter than any adversity could ever extinguish. And when the end finally came, when the cold embrace of death claimed him in a rain-soaked alley, his final thoughts were not of duty or honor, but of the love that had sustained him through even the darkest of times. As the world faded to black, a soft smile played upon his lips, for he knew that he had not died in vain. He had sacrificed everything, but in doing so, he had preserved the one thing that truly mattered. The love that bound his family together, a force more powerful than any oath or allegiance could ever hope to be. And as his soul slipped from this world, he found himself at peace, knowing that his wife and children would live on, their lives untainted by the harsh realities that had once threatened to tear them apart. For in the end, love had proven to be the greatest sacrifice of all.
And now finally for conclusion 4. So the first 3 conclusions have made it clear that the soldier's wife is a traitor, and the soldier has a choice to make. In conclusion 4, the wife has another bombshell for the soldier that's somehow more shocking than her admitting to him that she's a traitor to the country.
Conclusion 4. The double agent. As the dust settled in the aftermath of his wife's confession, the soldier felt the ground shift beneath his feet, the foundations of his reality crumbling with each passing moment. For years, he had lived a life of unwavering loyalty, his every action guided by the creed of honor and duty that had been drilled into him from the moment he took his oath. But now, as he stared into the eyes of the woman he had once loved, the truth lay bare before him. A truth so twisted, so utterly inconceivable, that it threatened to shatter the very core of his being.
You're one of them.
He whispered, his voice thick with disbelief.
All this time, you've been working for the enemy.
A slow, enigmatic smile spread across his wife's lips, her features hardening into a mask of cold indifference.
Not just me, my love.
She purred, her words a knife twisting in his gut.
You, too, have been playing your part in this grand game of deception.
The soldier recoiled as if struck, his mind reeling from the implications of her words. Him, a traitor? A double agent embedded within the very ranks he had sworn to protect. It was inconceivable, a notion so abhorrent that it made his stomach churn. And yet, as he searched his memory, the pieces began to fall into place. The inexplicable gaps, the orders that had always seemed just a little too convenient, the whispers of suspicion that had dogged his footsteps but never amounted to anything concrete.
No,
He growled, his fists clenching at his sides.
I don't believe you. I would never betray my country, my brothers in arms. Not for anything.
His wife's laughter was like shards of ice piercing his flesh.
Oh, but you have, my dear husband.
She taunted.
You have been our most valuable asset, feeding us information, carrying out missions that furthered our cause without ever realizing the truth.
As the weight of her words settled upon him, the soldier felt the world tilt on its axis, his sense of reality fracturing like a mirror shattering into a million pieces. Everything he had known, everything he had believed in, had been a lie. A carefully constructed illusion designed to keep him in the dark, a mere pawn in a game he had never even realized he was playing. In that moment, he understood the true nature of the choice that lay before him. He could cling to the tattered remnants of the life he had once known, the ideals of honor and duty that had been his guiding light for as long as he could remember. Or he could embrace the harsh reality that had been thrust upon him, shedding the shackles of his former existence and forging a new path alongside the woman who had deceived him so utterly. The decision was not an easy one, but as he gazed into the depths of his wife's eyes, he saw a glimmer of the love that had once bound them together. A love that had transcended the boundaries of allegiance and betrayal, a force more powerful than any oath or creed could ever hope to be. And in that moment, he made his choice. They disappeared into the night, two ghosts slipping through the shadows, leaving their former lives behind like shed skins. Gone were the soldier and his devoted wife, replaced by a pair of mercenaries bound by neither loyalty nor ideology, but by the unbreakable bond of love that had sustained them through even the darkest of deceptions. Their exploits became the stuff of legend, whispered tales of daring heists and daring double-crosses that left entire governments reeling in their wake. They were the ultimate wild cards, playing both sides against each other with a masterful precision that left friend and foe alike questioning the very nature of reality. And through it all, they remained together. Two souls bound by a love that had transcended the boundaries of morality and honor, a force so pure and powerful that it rendered all other allegiances meaningless. As the years bled into one another, the lines between right and wrong blurred, until the only truth that remained was the love they shared. They became nomads, drifting from one corner of the globe to the next, leaving a trail of chaos and destruction in their wake. But in the quiet moments, when the world had fallen away and it was just the two of them, they would find solace in each other's embrace, reveling in the knowledge that they had shed the shackles of their former lives to forge a new path together. And though the ghosts of their past would sometimes rise up to haunt them, they would face those demons side by side, drawing strength from the unbreakable bond that had carried them through even the darkest of betrayals. For in the end, they were no longer bound by the dictates of country or creed, but by a love that had proven stronger than any force on earth. They were the ultimate double agents, masters of deception who had played the greatest game of all, and emerged victorious, their love the only truth that mattered in a world built on lies. As they disappeared into the shadows once more, hand in hand, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Two hearts beating as one, forever bound by the love that had transcended the boundaries of loyalty and betrayal, honor and deceit. For they were more than soldiers or spies, more than heroes or villains. They were lovers, pure and simple, and in the grand tapestry of their lives, that was the only truth that truly mattered.
So, this story was a lot. Should this story continue, or are you content with one of the 4 conclusions? Anyway, like, share, subscribe, comment, all that jib jab. The algorithm likes that and it'll help boost and make the channel bigger. Anyway, click one of the other videos you see on your screen to listen to some more stories. Okay. That's it for me now. See you in the future.